Alright, now that we have created an image gallery and kind of laid out some stuff on the page the old school way, I'm going to show you the new way that is just absolutely amazing for doing this. The reason we did it the old school way first is because you have to understand that before you can really apply the new way. The new way is Flexbox. You may or may not have heard of Flexbox already, but Flexbox is amazing. Way back when, in the early days of the web, it was so incredibly annoying to try and lay things out on a web page. A lot of people invented little hacks to get around it, like they would create a table and then just set the table size and then put the content inside of the table to kind of give it a grid or layout like that. And that worked, except it made it extremely difficult for screen readers and any type of accessibility to get to it. It also made it very annoying on the web designer to have to edit all those properties individually, and then if the screen size changed, you were screwed. So Flexbox is a wonderful, wonderful tool, and now normally, and I have pulled up the MDN docs on this, they have a good write-up on Flexbox. It talks about all the different stuff, what it is. This is honestly, in my opinion, not the best way to learn Flexbox. The best way to learn Flexbox is a wonderful write-up on CSStricks.com that talks about Flexbox. And we're basically just going to go through this, and then I'm going to show you what it looks like and have you try it on your end. So, the background to it, we're going to cover this real quickly. The main idea behind the Flex layout is to give the container the ability to alter its items' width and height in order to best fill the available space. The purpose of this is to accommodate all kinds of devices and device screens. A Flex container expands items, so it makes them bigger, to fill the available space, or shrinks them to prevent them from overflowing. It does this automatically. You don't have to come in and tell it at what point you want these to become smaller. It does this automatically. It's wonderful. So we're going to talk about the basics and the terminology. This is very important. You have to get these down. Get these down first before you start going any further into Flexbox, or you will be confused. Since Flexbox's whole module, not a single property, involves a lot of things, including its whole set of properties. Some of them are meant to be set on the container, such as a parent element known as the Flex container, and others are meant to be set on the children, such as the Flex items. So to give you a picture of this darker gray is the Flex container. It's the parent item. It's a div, almost always, that contains all the things inside of it. And then that's the Flex container. The things inside of it, each one is a Flex item. So you have it, think of it like a bucket is the Flex container, and the things you put inside the bucket are your Flex items. The way this works is items are laid out along the main axis. The main axis is right here. By default, it's left to right, but you can change that. You can make it right to left, you can make it top to bottom, you can make it bottom to top. You have 4 options when it comes to setting the main axis. By default, like I said, it'll be left to right. They can also be laid out on the cross axis, which is the opposite, whatever's perpendicular. So if you make the main axis left to right, then your cross axis will be top to bottom or bottom to top. Again, you can change that, but it'll be perpendicular to your main axis. If you make your main axis top to bottom or bottom to top, your cross axis will be left to right, right to left. You set your main axis using the Flex Direction property. Flex Direction. By default, it will be row, which is left to right. Main size is a Flex item's width or height, whichever is in the main dimension, and it's the item's main size. It's either the width or the height property, whichever is in the main dimension. Again, width right here would be main because it's the main axis is left to right. Cross axis, as I said, is the axis perpendicular, and cross size is how tall it will be because that's the cross axis. And all that's wonderful, but let's get in here and start playing around with it. And we have a ton of examples of all the different things in here. So we're basically going to take these one by one and plug them in and see what they do. So let's make this smaller, move it over to the right, get where we need to go. There we go. All right, I have a wonderful little HTML document here called Flexbox is Awesome. It's right here. Inside of there, I'm going to put my container div. So remember, your container div needs to have a Flexbox applied to it. So container is what I'm going to call this. And in my CSS, looking for container, let's look over here and make sure we get it right. Properties for the parent. Display needs to equal Flex. This is how you're telling your web browser, hey, this is a Flexbox container. Display Flex. Then I save that, and inside of this div, I'm going to put a few divs and just color their background.
Many months later.
So inside my container, I have set up 3 divs. Each one is a flex item for the class, and this is just something I made up. This is not something, you don't have to use this particular term. I'm just going to call it flex item so I can set it in the CSS. And each one has an ID, 1, 2, and 3. Flex item 1, flex item 2, flex item 3. So over here, I'm just going to go ahead and for the flex item, oops, I need to do class flex item. I'm just going to set the min height to 100 pixels and min width to 100 pixels, just so they have some space to them. And then flex item 1, background is going to be red. Let me just duplicate this. 2 is going to be green. 3 is going to be blue. So I have this CSS set up. Only thing left to do is to connect it to my HTML. So up here in the head, I'm going to do a link. Wow, had my hangers in the wrong place. Link href equals flexbox.css. Save and refresh. And now I have 3 boxes. Each box, as I said, is currently 100 pixels by 100 pixels, and they're sitting right there. Already, you can tell that this is different because by default, those would be block level elements, but because this is flex, they are not. If I comment that out and refresh, these are now block level elements. See how that goes all the way across, all the way across, all the way across? But because I have flex on, they are now no longer block level elements. They are exactly 100 pixels. So we've got the display turned on. Then we set our flex direction. By default, it will be row, which is left to right, but you can do row reverse, which does right to left. You can do column, which is top to bottom. Column reverse is bottom to top. So right now it's RGB, but if I set the flex direction to row reverse, you'll see it starts over here on the right, and it's RGB. It's backwards. 1, 2, 3. So it puts the first item right there. I'll comment this out, so notice right now it's blue, green, then red over on the right. Now it's red, green, then blue over on the left. And this is confusing to some people, but what you have to keep in mind is just what this says. It starts, the first item starts there and goes according to whatever you set that at. The first item, if you set it to row reverse, starts here, then the second item, the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and continuing on. Same thing if we set it to column. Column starts at the top and goes down. So if we set this to column and refresh, starts at the top, RGB. And in fact, to make this a bit easier, I'm going to put the number 1, the number 2, and the number 3 in there. Can we read those? So there we go, 1, 2, and 3. I don't feel like centering it in there to waste the time to do that. So we have 1, 2, and 3. So right now it's column. If I do column reverse, save and refresh, 1, 2, and 3. Now the reason this did not go down to the bottom of the page, just like over here, you'll notice that when we did it row reverse, they went all the way to the right, is because it goes to the end of its parent, not the end of the page. So the parent right now is this tall. It only comes down to here. If we made the container taller, min height equals 2000 pixels, and refreshed, you'll notice, if I can click off, they're down here at the bottom. So it just goes to the bottom of to the end of its parent. So that's what flex direction does. I'm just going to leave it off because I want it to go left to right now. So 1, 2, and 3. Actually, I'm going to leave it on and explicitly state that it's row just so we can see it more easily. So we talked about flex direction, and again, we're setting these properties on the parent container. Container is the outside element, and each of those flex items are inside of that. So container is the outside. So for flex wrap, by default, flex items will all try to fit onto one line. You can change that and allow the items to wrap as needed. So by default, it'll do no wrap and it will shrink them down as needed. So for the flex items, instead of being 100 pixels, let's make them 400 pixels tall and 400 pixels wide. And refresh. Now let's look at these. These don't look 400 pixels tall and wide. Let's come down here and we'll see that they're actually 400 pixels tall, but they're only 274 pixels wide, even though we explicitly told them to be 400 pixels wide right here. The reason is that Flexbox by default will shrink things down to make them fit on the screen. If we make this bigger, oops, wrong one. If we make this larger, you'll see that they grow to fill the available space until they don't need to grow anymore because they're 400. Then as we get it smaller and smaller and smaller, they will shrink, and they will continue to shrink. This makes them awesome for responsive websites because they will automatically do that. You don't have to deal with that. We can come in here and do the flex wrap. Flex wrap. By default, it's no wrap, but you can change it to wrap if you want. And refresh, and now it wraps them onto the next line if they're too large. If I make this a bit bigger, eventually it'll get large enough. There we go. That one popped up because it can fit. And then once finally it's big enough, now that one fits. So flex wrap is how you do that. By default, it'll do no wrap and it will shrink them down. But you can wrap them. You have three options: no wrap, wrap, or wrap reverse, which will flex items will wrap into multiple lines from bottom to top instead of top to bottom. So wrap right now does 1, 2, 3 RGB. If we do wrap reverse, save and refresh, it does 3, 2, 1. So it does the same thing except it changes the order of the items. And again, by default, that is set to no wrap, so it will size the things down. Look at the next property, Flex Flow. Flex Flow is a shorthand that you can put, and it will do both of those. Just like for border, we could do, instead of setting border top to something, border bottom something, so on and so forth, we could just do border 5 pixels solid red, or 2 pixels or whatever. We can combine all those into one and refresh, and now we have a little bit of a border on it. Instead, you do flex flow. So you do flex flow, then you set your direction, and then you set your wrap. So I could do flex flow. Let's do column and column. Wait, the wrap is no wrap. Or let's do wrap. And then comment that out because we're setting it right here. Refresh, and now we're in column, and it would wrap if it needed to. If we did row wrap, see how it wraps. But if we leave this off, it will not wrap. So this is just a shorthand for setting both flex direction and wrap. I personally like to set them both individually just because it's more explicit and it's clearer and easier to understand when I'm reading my code, but that's a choice you can make. Then we have the fun one. This is the spacing. Justify content. And again, these are all going on the parent. It tells the parent, this is how I want you to distribute the extra space. So justify content, by default, it will be flex start. What that does is it means you move everything to the start of the flex. But let's try center. We're in a document, refresh, nothing seems to happen, but if we make it bigger so that there is some extra room, you'll notice now they're centered. They didn't used to be centered. If we comment that out and refresh, you'll see they're all over on the left. So they're centered. Let's make these a bit smaller so that we got a little bit more free space to play with. So now they're only 200 pixels. And over here in justify content, you see you've got several items: flex start, flex end, and again, flex end will just put at the end of Flexbox, and it moves the items all the way to the end and has all your extra space at the flex start. You have center, which we talked about. Space between is pretty cool. It will push them out as much as possible. You'll notice this one is all the way to the left, this one's all the way to the right, this one's right in the middle, and it has all the extra space divided in between them. But the one I like the best, and I think works for most websites best, is space around, where it divides the space in between them. So you have an equal amount of space, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you have that is the space around. It splits all the space around each element. And then finally you have space evenly. Over here in space evenly, save and refresh, you'll see that it has them kind of in the middle. in the math for that. Space evenly, items are distributed so that the spacing between any two items and the space to the edges is equal. So instead of having the extra space, instead of being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it just 1, 2, 3, 4. So either space around or space evenly are, generally speaking, the two that most people use the most, but they all definitely have their uses. And again, I just want to reiterate this, keep this in mind, that this is based on the flex direction. Right now it's row, reverse, and it switches them, but if we do column, save and refresh, they're still stacked on top of each other. And remember, that's because it's only based off of the parent. The parent is currently exactly as tall as the items, so there's no extra space to divide. But if we make the parent taller, if we make this container min height, those are 200 pixels, so let's do 800 pixels to give it a little bit extra room. Refresh. Now we've got that extra space because it will do it to the end of the parent element. Go ahead and get rid of that. Save and refresh. Put this back to row. Refresh. There we go. So justify content's cool. Align items is pretty neat as well. It allows you to align the items on the cross axis. The cross axis. Now again, because we're in row is left to right, cross axis would be vertical. But if we change this to column, cross axis would be horizontal. So to demonstrate this, we're going to make these boxes slightly different sizes. So flex item 1, instead of setting, let's set the height of flex item 1 to, instead of 200 pixels, let's make that 150 pixels, so it's a little bit smaller. Height of flex item 2 will be 250 pixels, and we'll leave 3 the same. So let's go look back and refresh, and now we've got these that are of different heights. And again, I didn't have to change it here because IDs are more specific than classes. If you don't understand that, you're welcome to look back at the video on specificity. So looking at the align items, by default it's stretch, meaning that it'll stretch it to fill the whole container unless you give it a specific height. So because we gave these specific heights, they're no longer stretching to fill the whole container, they're simply being the height that they are. But if we didn't, let's say we didn't give any of them a height, refresh, you'll notice that 3 got bigger because it no longer has an explicit height applied to it. But if we come down here and set the height to 200 pixels, it will respect that. It will respect those 200 pixels, but if we don't set it, it'll expand to fill the whole thing because it's set to stretch. And because we're in align items, it's only stretching in the cross axis, which is currently up and down. So you have flex start, meaning that all the items will be placed at the top, which they currently are already, just because that's what it does when it does stretch. It will put them at the top and then stretch them to the bottom. It's putting them to the top, and then if it could stretch them, it would, but because we've defined heights for all these, it can't. Your next item is flex end, and that will put them at the bottom of it. So let's come over here and set it to align items flex end. Refresh, and you'll see these move down so that their bottom is the same as this 2 one. Next option is center. Refresh, and now they're all centered along this center, like the center line. Next option is stretch, which again is the default, and we've already talked about that it will stretch them as much as it can, but on our example it won't because we're explicitly setting the height for each of these. I'm actually going to change this to flex start so they're a little bit closer together and easier to compare their sizes. And then you have baseline, which is another problem. We haven't really talked about the baseline, but baseline is basically the bottom of the text box inside there. So you'll notice we have text here inside of each one, and it'll set it so that those are all aligned. So let's look at it and do baseline. Refresh, and now those texts are all aligned, which it looks like, because of this example, it's the top. But if we were to come in here and, I don't know, set the padding top to 10 pixels and refresh, you'll notice that the baselines are still aligned, and this one just extends to the top because it's got some padding. set it to 100 pixels and refresh, and you can see the numbers, the text is still lined up. Then you have align content, which I'm not going to demonstrate, but it's basically the same thing as justify content, except along the cross-axis. You have little pictures examples here, so if you have multiple lines, if your stuff goes on to multiple lines, it shows how those lines will interact with each other. Will you have a bunch of space between the lines? Will you have space around the lines? Will you stretch them taller? Will they all be centered on the page? That's align content. And that's it for the parent container, for the Flex container properties. Now let's look at the properties that you can put on the children, on the Flex items. The first one is order, and this does exactly what it sounds like. It allows you to change the order in which items are displayed on the screen. By default, all of them have a 0, have an order of 0. Default is 0. But you can set them to be whatever you want. So right now, it's 1, 2, 3. But what I can do is I can come in here and set Flex item 1 to have an order of 1, which is higher, and it will move to the end because it starts at the 0, at the lowest number, 0, 0, 1. And I could set Flex item 2 to have an order of 20. Now it starts at 0 because Flex item 3 still has an order of 0. 0, 1, 20. So it starts at the lowest number and moves up to the highest number. This allows you to quickly and easily reposition things in that flow, in that Flex flow. Notice it still starts at the beginning. So if we change this to row reverse, instead of going 3, 1, 2, it'll go 3, 1, 2 this way because it starts at the beginning of the Flex direction. So that's order, and you can go into negative if you want. So you can do -1 for the first one. Now it's -1, 0, 20. I'm going to get rid of the orders real quick so that, oops, they don't get confusing. Now, to keep in mind, all of the orders are now 0. Flex grow is the next property, and it allows us to have our items grow to meet the available space. So they'll get bigger for the space. So let's go ahead and change this to min width instead of width, and make this min height. That way it can grow if needed. So we go back over here, nothing should change. See, nothing changed. But if we come in and add grow of 1, or is it flex grow? Yeah, flex grow of 1, and refresh, this takes up all the extra space. All the extra space goes to that one. If we take this flex grow and apply it to each of the other two, it's equally split. If we take number 2 and tell it flex grow 2, it sets up a ratio where it grows twice as much as the other. So this is now taking up 50%, this is 25, this is 25. And you can do 2.5 right there. You can set 50. So you can play around with that ratio. I want this element to be 2/3 of the page, so you might set that to 0.67, and these to 0.33 and 0.33. Save and refresh. So that's a way you can just do some quick math to make these grow and get larger as you like. Flex shrink is the same. It tells you how much they should shrink if the screen gets too small, so what order do you want them to shrink in. I've never used flex shrink in my life. I've always set flex grow instead. I've always set it to the smallest that I want it to be and then set the flex grow ratio. That way, when it's the smallest I want it to be, I don't have to worry about flex shrink, but you have that option. And there are more. There's flex bases, which lets you basically choose how the default size before any more spaces allocated. There's some shorthand in there for all of that. There's align self, where you can choose to pull itself out of the default alignment, kind of override the default alignment for a single item. So there's more in there that you can play around with, and I recommend you do. But this video is already way too long, so I want to go ahead and bring it to an end. But really, this Flexbox is amazing. Flexbox is absolutely mind-bogglingly amazing considering how things used to be. So I highly recommend you check out Flexbox. And in the next video, we are going to use Flexbox to create a similar image blog thing like we did last time, except we're going to use Flexbox and show you how easily you can do this and how you can make it very responsive very easily. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll be happy to help. Thanks.